Turtles all the way down. I'm Jake, sometimes Cenk. Every now and then I find myself kind of asking a very basic question, which is, what the fuck is going on? I mean, we kind of pretend that it's not. It's kind of like a giant elephant in the room. You exist. I exist. I'm talking to you. You're an entity. I'm an entity. This world is here. And I sometimes wonder, why is there any of it at all? Why is there anything instead of nothing? I mean, this is kind of like the basic question of ontology, of being, what it is to be. Why is there being at all? Is asking the question, why, appropriate? Yeah. So, sometimes we're presented, I think, we're presented with this mystery of life. And sometimes it's represented in some of the art and film and writing that we've seen throughout our history. There's a film recently called Cube, which was a Canadian film which I really enjoyed maybe 20 years ago now. But it's kind of a story that is familiar throughout the history of art and literature. The story is that, people basically just wake up somewhere, and in this case in a cube, in a room, and they don't know how they got there, or what their purpose is, or who put them there. Can they leave that cube? Well, it turns out that each of these walls are connected. Each of the surfaces of this cube has an entrance to another cube. So, people just work out their theories to figure out how to get through it, and they do some calculations, and some specialized knowledge is involved, and some cooperation, and some battles happen, and it becomes quite clear that, this is kind of a metaphoric view of what our life is like. You're just kind of thrown into this existence without explanation. But the saving grace of that is that we don't just wake up one day fully formed with this mystery. We're given time to ease into it. So you're born, a baby, without thought, really, of any abstract kind that's in any way, leading you to have any abstract ideas. And once that starts forming around the age of 2, you start becoming a person with a mind, and you're kind of thrown into all of these games, language being one of them. I mean, how do you learn language? You're not given all the rules of language as a baby and say, oh, here's all the grammar, here's all the definitions, go. I mean, that's not how it works. You're kind of thrown in with limited understanding, limited knowledge, limited information, and you start by making mistakes. So, you see doggy, and maybe you see a goat and you say doggy, and you see a rabbit and you say doggy, and eventually you start to find that there are more precise ways to talk about it. And eventually you start taking part in all kinds of, right away you start taking part in games or ways of life or cultures or processes that have been reiterated and iterated over and over again throughout the centuries and millennia of people, your ancestors, doing things together. And by repetition, certain successful patterns get repeated. And those that are apt or that are able to perpetuate these patterns procreate. That's kind of a simple Darwinian way of looking at it, but whether you're talking about genes or memes, it's kind of an imperfect, incomplete information you're thrown in, much like that room in the cube, and you got to figure it all out. Also reminds me of a Twilight Zone episode. When I was a kid, I used to watch these black and white Twilight Zone reruns on TV late at night. Usually around midnight, they would put it on. And there was one episode that I remember, it was called 5 Characters in Search of an Exit. And kind of similar idea. This guy is thrown into a giant cylinder, and he finds a few other people around him. And nobody knows how they got there, or what their purpose is, or who's in control of this cylinder that they're in. And, some issues happen between them. Some people are quite content saying, well, that's just the way it is. We're just going to be here, so never you mind the rest of it. And some people are just obsessed with trying to figure it out. What's beyond that cylinder? Can I leave? And I guess these are kind of like the philosophers. We're in this room, which brings me to Jean-Paul Sartre. He had a theatrical play called Huis Clos, which I guess translates as in camera, like a meeting in a room. And in English, they called it No Exit. So kind of a similar idea. And these all, I actually kind of, from what I can see, the earlier version that I can remember is Pirandello's play, 6 Characters in Search of an Author. And all of these are kind of toying with this idea that we're in a mystery. We're kind of thrown in, and we do our best to figure it out. And this is what happens to everybody, each and every one of us. And what happens is we forget that we were just thrown in. We get so entrenched into these games, these cultural practices, these norms, these whether they're even biological frames of reference and patterns that keep you on a rail of limited behaviors. As a baby, we're thrown in. We figure it out. And then, there's some kind of an awakening around, as I said, around the age of 2, when you start to see things more abstractly. You can use symbols and signs, and that's kind of a profound difference. And then, speaking in my personal case, maybe around the age of 12, I remember having another awakening, and then and each time this happens, you think, oh, now I see. Revelation, in a way. And that's true. But what I'm noticing is that we keep repeating this. This happens over and over again. What some people, when you have this kind of an experience where you feel like you've just woken up, that everything kind of fits into place, and you are forever changed because of that interpretation. So I'm going to say that that's what you're doing is you're not necessarily waking up, you're reframing. You're using a different analogy, a different frame that has more explanatory power, maybe. And as a result, maybe it includes more of the processes that were puzzling to you. And it all kind of fits together under this new framework. And so what you'll have is over and over again, and I'm finding this in my own case, you keep having these awakenings. And but I think it's a mistake to think that there's an ultimate one. These are shells. We keep reframing. And each time you reframe, you get something more out of it. Sometimes you lose. Maybe as your cognitive abilities degrade over time, you might be drawn to simpler and simpler frameworks from which to view the world. And we can see how that plays out amongst the seniors, amongst our parents. The world just kind of narrows a little bit, becomes a little simpler, more black and white. But these are all reframings. These are all reinterpreting, reimagining. You're telling another narrative. You're framing it within another story that explains everything, or a lot of things. I guess what I'm trying to do in this podcast really is, and it's not necessarily something that I thought of in advance, but I'm noticing as I go through these monologues, there seems to be some kind of a consistent approach to things. I think what I'm trying to do, and I'm only doing this retroactively or trying to figure it out, what I'm trying to do, I guess, is in some sense give you different framings, reinterpretations, and to also point out that there are such things. Now, that's not to mean, and this is kind of the danger of nihilism, is that once you realize the perspectival nature of the universe, that everything is dependent upon a perspective or context, people kind of jump to the conclusion that, well, anything goes then, because you kind of get into this postmodern morass, as they as they try to, or some will try to say that, well, then it just devolves down into a game of power, or, but what they're really doing is they're just reframing it at another layer. Or, economists might speak in terms of the flows of money and demographics. Those are also useful. A religious person might describe what's going on in terms of, the evolution of spirit. These are all useful frameworks and interpretations from which to view. What I'm trying to do is avoid the mistake of thinking any one of them answers everything. And I really think that a lot of our arguments, debates, conflicts really revolve around people talking past each other. And also, a lot of assumptions are made. And most of the assumptions are assumptions of certainty. Well, I guess an AI robot or even a sim character. You look at the sim game. These are characters that are not real. They're on your screen. And they're, I guess, with each version of the software, they get more and more sophisticated. I can imagine somewhere in the near future where these characters become so complex that, is it possible that they may start to exhibit behaviors of being conscious and awake? Well, if we allow them the ability to learn and figure shit out, yeah, that's probably going to happen. And it's kind of that same tragic story that we're all involved in our lives. That is, the tragic is that we're thrown in here and you just kind of live your life. And you could conceivably live your whole life and not think about these things. And you could conceivably live your life and not really be awake. I mean, there are, seems a little demeaning maybe, but there are people that kind of sleepwalk through life and they don't think about anything. And that's not a dismissal. That's a standard operating procedure. And it has been for millennia. But something different is happening. And I'm kind of seeing it like my own personal development. When I was 12 and, you discover some deep philosophical concepts and infinite regression and the questions of what's going on become ever more difficult to tackle as you go further and further into the scales. When you get down to the quantum levels and you start to see that this billiard ball approach to the universe doesn't really work at that level. And this is what we do. We take something that we understand. We have access to the frequencies, the layers of information that are within our scale. Not too big, not too small, not too long, not too short. We have a great deal of experience with that. Our bodies have been evolved to meet that challenge. And our cultures have built upon that and then transmitted knowledge and skills and information between generations that built on top of it. Now, when we create a AI robot, it would be a mistake to think that we're going to just create a program and switch it on and this thing is going to be alive. Probably not. And that might be terrifying, because then that would be like the character in Cube in the movie, or Twilight Zone, or that Sartre, or Pirandello, where you just kind of wake up and go, what the fuck? What's going on here? What is this? Why am I here? Why am I? What is I? What is why? All of these would just be baffling if you just had to wake up in that instant. Mercifully, as I said, we're thrown in as a baby and we slowly work our way through the dream. And sometimes that's what it feels like. This whole life is, and some people will say this, it's kind of like a dream, maybe more so than we realize, in the sense that it's all just kind of weird and haphazard and doesn't really make sense. And you're just trying to, much like when you're trying to describe a dream to a friend, it's kind of hard. You're kind of forced to, by speaking it out, you're narrowing that experience. You're actually diminishing what it was. And that it ends up, what you described to your friend is not really what you experienced. And you can't really fully express that. And this is kind of the mystery that we're all living in all the time. And we all pretend that, oh yeah, it's just business as usual. It's like the people inside that cylinder where the guy in the Twilight Zone ends up. And most of the people are saying, well, that's just the way it is. And maybe that's the way to go. I'm not saying the endless questioning and search of, going through every layer of turtle ad infinitum is the way to go. Clearly, if everybody did this, thought about this all the time, I don't know if we'd get a lot done. We might. And we might have ample opportunity for such things once, robots take over most of the labor. People are going to have to do something. I'm thinking they're going to get more philosophical. So, these rails that we're on, these cultural practices that we're engaged in, these games that we jump into without having full knowledge. I mean, language just develops on its own. Nobody just created a language. Well, they tried to do that in modern times, but, like the Latin language, it just formed from people trying to communicate with each other. And then along comes these intellectual grammarians who look at the patterns that have probably taken, centuries to develop and solidify and become a thing. Then these grammarians try to kind of freeze it with their rules, saying, well, this is the rule and this is the way it's got to be. Which is kind of bizarre. I mean, there should be a guideline for such things so you don't stray off the beaten path, but it's kind of silly, and you see this in the proponents of the French language in particular are stereotyped for this. Kind of a strange thinking that language is static. It's not static. It's constantly moving and changing. There is no right way ultimately and objectively to say anything, to speak anything, to grammatically compose it. But because over the centuries, and it's actually probably a smaller timeline because languages change greatly in a century, but these ways of communicating with people become effective, they become repeated, it becomes a tactical skill in how to get your ideas across, and that becomes more and more used and spread, and then we start to see all these regularized patterns of speech and behavior. So someone writes them down and says, oh, these are rules. But it's not like a rule has been given from above. We're describing what we've already solidified into something. Well, yeah, so how does something become a thing? Well, I think repetition has a lot to do with it. Something that's, iterations over and over again start to take on a being. If people cooperate in certain ways and do things certain ways together over the centuries, we develop the institution of marriage, for example. And then people that are born into it, they don't even question it. Well, that's just the way it is. Now, it's kind of troubling for some when you are able to step back, and this is kind of what happens, I think, when I was, in my personal case, the later teen years, maybe early 20s, you're kind of grappling with this, what I think the world is kind of grappling with more and more now. It used to be that this kind of realization of the absurdity of the universe was only really entertained by a very small percentage of people. The intelligentsia, the theologians, philosophers. But now, I think a lot of people are getting a taste of that. They're getting a taste of, I guess some people are calling this the kind of the postmodern realization of the lack of fundamental underpinnings of beliefs and morals and even science. And that becomes a kind of a frightening thing to deal with. And you got to kind of work that out. And the way I've worked it out is that, okay, look, I've got a twofold project, as I said. One is to figure out what the fuck is going on, and the other one is how the fuck should I live? Now, I'm never going to get to the full answer of the first question. I can talk about epistemology, metaphysics, ontology, science, and I will have various frameworks from which to view it. None of them is going to be ultimate objective answer to everything. But because of that, and maybe I was at some point when I was younger, become paralyzed by this, thinking, well, then how do I choose to do anything? Well, much like the language game that you were thrown into, you're thrown into these games. You're thrown into the cultural practices and, codified behaviors of family, for example. Nobody really tells you what to do there. Most of us get it wrong. But there's kind of a range of behaviors that becomes solidified, and that becomes a cultural practice. It becomes a norm. It becomes encoded in our DNA. And over time, it becomes kind of an unquestioned, strata on which we build everything. And that's true. So just because I don't know what's going on ultimately at the bottom core of everything, whether quantum mechanics and strings and everything else is the way to look at the world, I am quite confident that I know these cultural practices, these games, these ways of life. I know what it means to be a family member. I'm sometimes a bad son or uncle. Sometimes I'm wonderful. But we have a range of behaviors that have been codified over time in our culture. Yeah, as usual, I'm getting off track. So, this conversation coming up was with Andrea Subissati, and she's the editor at Rue Morgue Magazine. And, as befitting the type of guest we had, we talked a little bit about horror and sci-fi and that sort of thing. I got to admit that I was more of a sci-fi nerd than a horror nerd, but when you kind of combine the two, it's kind of fascinating. Like a few of those, like The Cube or that Twilight Zone or Sartre, it's kind of like a horror sci-fi scenario. The mystery that we're thrown into, we keep waking up and finding reframings, reinterpretations. And then we realize that it's all interpretation all the way down. It's turtles all the way down. Yeah, we got to figure this shit out. Well, hope you enjoyed the conversation. Talk soon.
Sounds wonderful. So I'm not allowed to prepare. I'm not allowed to know what we're just going to freestyle.
No, I mean, we already started.
Okay. What? You've started recording?
Yeah.
You sneaky.
That's all there is to it.
Sneaky.
So welcome.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that does smell nice. What was that we were just burning? The Palo Santo.
Palo Santo and my vaping.
Oh, is that? Oh, yeah. I did have a couple of puffs before this broadcast, and
how do you feel?
I don't worry too much about doing that because a lot of people say, if you smoke it, it's going to put you off in a certain sort of way. But I think I've been smoking it so much that it has almost no effect on me
well,
cognitively.
You're in your environment.
Yeah.
You know what you're smoking. Different strains I'll react with differently and different states of mind, different environments. Comfortable in here, though. It's beautiful.
Yeah, very colorful. We tend to have a lot of creative events and energy going on in here. So the next thing we're going to do is probably a stand-up comedy night.
In here?
In here, yeah.
Wow.
Does that interest you? Is that
to attend?
to perform?
To perform?
Attend any of it? Yeah.
My hilarious anecdotes of
probably have
Easter
some.
weekend trips to the emergency room?
Yeah, you're doing better.
Yes.
Good.
Much better, thank you.
So we have a friend in common, Rodrigo,
yes.
who's been, and Marco, I guess, as well, the Rue Morgue guys.
That's right.
And quite recently, you've taken on the top job there.
That's right. That's very much thanks to Rodrigo. I've nobody ever says that they want to grow up and be the editor of a horror magazine. You know what I mean? It's not a career that you have in mind. You just kind of do your thing. And I got into horror journalism. I got into writing about horror from my master's degree, actually. I wrote my thesis on zombie films.
Cool.
For sociology. So after that, it just kind of came naturally that I would start writing for Rue Morgue, and I was making a podcast and making a YouTube channel. And, you know, you just plug away at a 9 to 5 doing your passion projects on the side in the hopes that the right person is going to hear you and see potential and help you develop it. And Rodrigo was very much that for me.
So you were kind of involved in that community of writing about horror?
Writing about horror and even thinking about horror in a certain way. Coming from an academic background, coming from a cultural studies background, horror has great relevance to me personally. It almost feels like a form of activism. Yeah.
You know, you mentioned zombies. That's always been kind of one of my favorite, I guess, subgenres.
Yeah,
Is that what you'd call it?
Sure.
But I'm interested to hear that you took kind of an academic stance on that, or position on that. Or is it something about? I mean, to me, it seems like zombies kind of lends itself, maybe obviously, to this notion of walking amongst, the everyday people who are maybe the zombies, and that the person that's kind of engaged in this fantasy of the zombie world is maybe empathizing with the hero protagonist in this movie that's set in a world amongst people that are basically brain dead.
That's definitely one interpretation. There's so many. There's such scope for analysis and different positions within it. Consumerism is another obvious allegory. Capitalism. When I was looking at it for my master's thesis, there was a resurgence of zombie movies. The zombie movies of the 1970s where they're slow and their brains, and that was definitely in response to a 1970s crisis of consumerism and changed identity and stuff like that. The second wave of zombies had the zombies moving faster.
Right. Was that 28 Days?
28 Days Later, Resident Evil, those were kind of the harbingers of the zombie nouveau. And so I started doing research on the history of zombies, how they came from Haiti. And I realized that zombies were, the way they were constructed in Western horror films, there was an element of culpability. There was an element of community. There was a transgressive element. And so I definitely wasn't the first to write academically about zombie movies, but I think the way I applied it to modern life.
So you would consider Haiti as being kind of the bedrock of this kind of, because it seems like, I don't know, what I know about the Haitian idea of zombies, or what I'd heard in popular culture, is this notion about this thing that you can ingest that will make a person seem like they're dead and be under the control in a way.
That's
so
right.
The zombie seems to have the sense of being under the control of somebody.
That's right.
It's not about being out of control and being a danger, in a sense that, like, a lot of zombie movies they're out of our control, and that's why they're scary.
Well, the way the Haitians understand it is your soul is captured by a witch doctor. Obviously, there's a pharmaceutical element that makes you appear dead, such that you're going to be buried and you're not going to be in possession of all your faculties after that. But there definitely is an element of your soul being under control of someone else, and that is what was terrifying for the Haitians. It wasn't so much being, like, nobody was afraid of zombies. Everybody was afraid of becoming a zombie.
Right.
And so that was kind of in contradistinction to the situation you were just describing, where, in the West, maybe we more relate to being the one thinking person in a mass of unthinking people, which is it's a compelling
stance to take, especially when you're young and growing up. I mean, I certainly felt like that. I mean, I think a lot of maybe bright kids do. They just feel like, oh my God, the world's they're just so stupid. Everyone's so stupid. Like, what the fuck is going on? Why doesn't everybody see some of the obvious things in the world? And
for sure.
And, I guess in a way that was clearly an experience of my youth. And I feel like over the years, I learned to, in a way, be more forgiving.
Sure.
But I got to say, the last little while, I'm kind of going back a little.
Okay.
Thinking maybe I may have overestimated.
Oh, really?
A lot of the world. I don't know.
I feel like, we're living in our generation saw the internet emerge, and the world kind of grew and then it shrunk. And I feel like the internet offers such potential for finding your tribe in very meaningful ways. And that's something that I was able to do through podcasting, actually. Because I found one other girl, Alexandra West, who loves talking about horror in a similar way that I do. And so we made a podcast and we put it out there, and we just launch it into the black hole of the internet. And again, like, eventually the right people found us. And so a community emerges out of that lets you know you're not alone. And it's definitely helped me deal with some of the more unsavory elements of political and social life going on today.
It helps you to deal with that.
Yeah. I have a tendency to, I mean, they say ignorance is bliss, and I find the news very troubling, and so I tend to avoid it. And it's not something I'm especially proud of. I'm not always up to speed on global political matters because I can't. Yeah.
I find myself retreating from it a little more than usual lately, by getting into it. But I got to say, I mean, I think this culture, I don't know, horror subculture, whatever, it seems to me that from outside, I have these kind of stereotypical understandings of these subcultures, I guess, that I'm not necessarily a part of, but it seems like they may be less engaged politically than some other subcultures. Is that generally the case? Because it does seem to kind of reside in a fantasy world in some ways. So I'm wondering if it's more likely for people to be disengaged from the messiness of the world. I don't know.
Interesting. Yeah. I would make an argument that horror enables people to engage with the messiness from a safe space, in a safe way. Yeah, you know what I mean? That's how I do it anyway.
Yeah, many ways to approach it.
Yeah.
So, there are, Rodrigo and I talked a little bit about this as well, and I'm going to maybe bombard you with questions, much like someone comes in.
Do it. Hit me.
You probably. What is the attraction, do you think? Is it consistent throughout for people to want to be scared?
I think there's so many reasons. I think it's a deeply personal thing. I think there's definitely people who get off on the thrills and chills. For myself personally, I find horror isn't patronizing. It isn't spoon-feeding me popular Western ideology. It kind of gives me meat, more so than other forms of media. And indeed, there's an element of resistance, as I mentioned before. I think Rodrigo has he's said some brilliant things about it. He was profiled in that Why Horror documentary. I was in that as well, and I think he gave an example of.
I haven't seen that yet. I forgot about that. Yeah.
It's hard to see. It's not it's not easily found, unfortunately. I got to see it screened in Toronto, but I don't think it has a wide release. It pops up on Super Channel now and then. But I remember Rodrigo made a very interesting remark, likening horror movies to going to the Coliseum, going to the arena, and just that there's an innate drive in people to witness that kind of violence and be part of it. And horror movies are a step in the right direction in that respect.
But it seems like even if you're watching something like the Coliseum or a horror film, it seems like you could come at it from a couple of different ways, obviously. But there seems to be a natural cleave between empathizing with the victim or empathizing with the perpetrator of the horror. I wonder if, it's kind of an even split. How are people enjoying this? Is it like, are they kind of imagining themselves in the terrible situation of this person that's about to, meet some kind of dangerous fate, and as a result feel that empathy and that rush? Or is it, that looks like fun to chop somebody up? I don't know how much of that. Yeah. And can you tell the difference between your friends?
For myself, like, horror movies kind of fall into three categories. There's the kinds that, jerk scares out of you with jump scares. They're going to startle you. They're going to shock you.
Cheaper ways to do that, you see sometimes.
Exactly. So that's my least favorite, probably. The second is kind of a movie that engenders a feeling of dread because it does foster a sense of empathy with whoever's in that situation. And when you're watching it, you have this crawling, dreadful feeling of terror. And then there's the movies that posit a situation that has an element of philosophy and makes you ruminate on like human nature. And yeah, exactly. That's the buzz that's the dragon that I'm chasing whenever I watch a horror movie. That's always what I'm looking for, is something that's going to keep me up at night. And but yeah, that's not true of all horror fans. Some people are just in it for the blood.
And when Rodrigo did ask me what an example of a movie that scared me, I didn't have very many, but it was Invasion of the Body Snatchers for some reason, because again, like you described, it has this kind of a high concept that's going on, and people being taken into an alternative state of consciousness that once you're there, people will tell you is acceptable and wonderful and come on over. That's kind of always been kind of a very basic, frightening thing for me, is to, it's also the thing that maybe frightens me from such groups, like religions or cults and that sort of thing, because it seems like it's, people are telling you, come join us, you'll be happy. But when you do, you lose a sense of yourself in some way. And that seems frightening more than anything else, kind of losing yourself in a more basic way, your consciousness.
Right.
Yeah. Do you have any kind of a religious background?
I was raised Roman Catholic. My parents are Italian. They were both born in Italy, and then they originally immigrated to Montreal. And I grew up in Ottawa. And we went to Catholic school, which was pretty nice for a teenage goth. I had my dress code, and fuck it, I was going to dress like that anyway, so as well. You get out of class for mass and stuff like that, and I'm not practicing anything now, and I did take some world religions courses when I was going to school, but I am a sociologist, so I tend to look at religion in terms of the function it performs in society, and I think it does perform a function in society. And I actually, it's something of I'm not a religion apologist, but I find myself defending it because it seems really trendy to bash it at the moment.
There are a lot of asshole atheists out these days.
Totally.
Which, I kind of used to be in my early 20s, kind of an asshole atheist.
Oh, sure. So was I. Yeah, absolutely. But, and then, and then you get to a place where you're like, you know what? Science isn't going to tuck me in at night. Science is it's not going to help me live in this world that we've created. And we don't have answers for everything, and you have to be comfortable with that. And if looking to the cosmos is what does it, then fuck it. You do you.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like there's basically unlimited number of narratives that could be furnished for any kind of an understanding, and religion is, subset of types of narratives that explain what's going on and what you should do, and science is another way to do it.
Sure.
Use them all,
Use them all. Just cherry pick. Yeah, exactly. Make your own. Make your own. There's a TV series coming out soon based on American Gods, the Neil Gaiman novel. Are you familiar with that?
No.
I love it. Do you have a religious background?
No. Grew up atheist, but I'm from a Turkish background, which tends to be predominantly Muslim. Okay. So when I was in Istanbul, I was in a Muslim country, but I was in a kind of a neighborhood that had a lot of Jews and Armenians, and in fact, my dad's restaurant was kind of surrounded by a synagogue behind the, which was actually kind of a little restaurant with a little casino upstairs. And then in the neighborhood behind, on the other side streets, there was a kind of like a red light district. There was even like brothels nearby.
Wow.
Istanbul's a mishmash of amazing.
Fun.
Yeah, then you got your transvestite neighborhood not too far from back then,
And everybody gets along?
Yeah. Everyone kind of, seems to keep, as long as you're not being, I guess, overly showy about your in the wrong place,
right.
You'll be fine. You go into those certain neighborhoods down the side streets, you'll find any kind of European weirdness.
Anything you're after,
it'll be there. But people know that when you're there, that's what it is. When you don't bring it out to the main street to do that kind of thing. So in a way, it's closeted in some sense, I suppose, more than. But
in a good sense.
Yeah, but they're kind of allowed. But, this is kind of what I've been saying about the country maybe up until recently, because it's changing. I don't know if you've heard about what's going on in Istanbul or Turkey, but they just had an election, a referendum essentially to give more autocratic powers to the president. So it seems like they're voluntarily producing a dictator.
Wow. And did the referendum pass? Was it
a
landslide?
Just a couple of days ago. No, it was that's the thing.
Close.
It's like 51-49. So there's a bit of turmoil there.
In in the world. There's turmoil everywhere. So many close referendums and bullshit elections and.
But that seems to be kind of the state of nature in a way. Like everything seems to come to almost a 50-50 split. It's almost like people just eventually take sides. They take a team, and then you find yourself reinforcing one view or another. Almost anything. It's almost any controversy.
You can bend your reality to support one side.
Especially if somebody starts, pushing one side, you sometimes feel the other people that are on the other side feel, an incentive to push harder the other way. So it moves everybody away from the center.
Yep.
And you have this weird polarization that seems to be especially with the internet, like, you know what you said earlier, you find your tribe, but unfortunately the assholes find their tribes too.
Yeah.
Right? So you're kind of amplifying all kinds of behavior, whether good or bad. Indeed. And the amplification might be getting out of hand for a lot of people. And we're kind of seeing this play itself out and, the behaviors on a large scale.
Yeah.
Maybe zombie apocalypse is not that far.
Maybe it's not a bad idea.
Bring it on.
Yeah, just hit the reset button.
It's funny. I come across that a lot these days, and more from younger people than I would expect from older people. So let's just reset, and I get more of that.
Well, sure.
Response to the world.
If you look at these elections, and you remember when Rob Ford was elected, just looking demographically at who voted for him, it was outside the GTA, it was older people, and even with the American presidential election, I think there's definitely a feeling among millennials of let's just wait it out. The boomers are going to die. We'll take over. We'll fix it. We'll clean it up. Yeah.
So. I don't know if it's rude to ask your age, but you're younger than me. I'm just wondering what era you were in high school and.
I was in high school. Well, I remember the crimper. Let that be a hint.
Doesn't register.
No, damn it. Does it register with you, Claire? Yeah, she's shaking her head. I was born in 1982, and I had two older sisters, which I think really. If not for them, I'd consider myself firmly 90s millennial grunge land growing up. But there was definitely lots of 80s in our house. And I have big hair naturally, so I fit right in.
Well, I grew up in Hamilton most of my life.
Okay.
So I'm very familiar with probably a similar culture that you grew up in. A lot of my friends were Italian Canadians. And,
okay.
My brother-in-law is my best friend was. The girls I was seeing were, like everybody was around me it's to such an extent that people just assumed I was Italian most of the time.
No kidding.
And sometimes I just go along with it because it was just too much
just easier.
to correct people all the time.
That actually wasn't my experience. When my parents immigrated to Montreal, they lived in a very Italian neighborhood. And then they moved to Toronto, where I was born, and then I grew up in Ottawa in the suburbs that were very white. And I often look back at my family that stayed in Montreal and are still very Italian. They all speak Italian. I don't speak it at all. And their lives are just very different. Big, lavish weddings, and they're all having kids. Girls my age are like on their third or fourth by now, and my reality is so totally different. And I often wonder if it's because we kind of broke away geographically like that.
Yeah, I find that this was true of my friends that were growing up in Hamilton who had Italian parents who came over from Italy when they were younger, and the same thing with my parents who came over, from Turkey. It almost seems like these ethnic communities have a sense of what their country was like 30 years ago. And, they keep the same kind of, it's almost like a freeze frame of culture.
Sure.
So when things start changing, in the country of, where they immigrated to, they start to react against it as if it's some kind of an evil thing. And, they try to remain Italian or remain Turkish. And
they romanticize the situation.
But they don't realize that back where they came from, they've already moved on.
Yeah.
But you're kind of stuck in 1950s Italy then, but Italy's moved on, and in some ways they're, culturally more advanced than North America. They're not keeping their girls locked up at home, like they were doing here, which you noticed. But
you remember that, eh?
Definitely. It was a big part of my sexual awakenings.
All the time.
Especially with the kilts. That was always exciting.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, me too.
Yeah? I'm looking at your tattoos. They're very elaborate and wow.
Thank you.
And I realized that I don't have any tattoos.
Not a one?
Not a one.
What are you waiting for?
I owe it to probably my lack of ability to commit to anything.
Yes.
It's also the reason I don't have kids or, any kind of normal lifestyle.
Sure.
It seems it's because I can't even seem to commit any idea. Because it seems like if you put it on, it's going to be there for so long that you got to be pretty damn sure about it. But lately I'm starting to realize, no, you don't really have to be. It could be just kind of a nice souvenir from a stage in your life, rather than thinking about it as, this permanently reflects me. And when somebody looks at it when I'm 80, and is it okay for them to think that reflects me?
That's so interesting because I feel like I used to think that way before I got the tattoos. But once you do, it becomes a part of you just like anything else. And I think there's definitely political and ideological dimensions to my decision to have as many tattoos as I do and have them as visible as I do and what they are and stuff like that. There's definitely a reclaiming of the female body that is so objectified and aggressively objectified in our culture. But there's also an element of women are kind of, beauty is such a status that is ascribed to us, and we kind of have to play the cards we're dealt. You know what I mean? Like we can diet and we can this and we can that, and if you can afford it, you can get plastic surgery. But the whole cosmetics industry is kind of about taking matters into your own hands, and playing the card that you're dealt as best you can. So I almost feel like my tattoos are, they're just there. Take them or leave them. They're part of me. They're immutable. And I was hesitant about the permanence of them, but it was very liberating to kind of give yourself over to that and find that you're okay with it.
Yeah, that's kind of hard.
I think that anxiety is really natural, but I'm much more inclined to mark myself than have kids per se and bring someone else into this situation.
And there's something that really reflects you for the rest of your life as well.
Well, yeah.
So it's the same reason I don't have kids. Otherwise, it seems like a pretty fun adventure. But,
having kids?
Yeah. Do you ever think about it?
Yes. I mean, I kind of resent when women my age are kind of like, are you sure? Have you thought it through? There's always kind of an implication that the reason I don't is because I haven't quite sat down and thought it through. And on the
Never
one hand,
occurred to you.
On the one hand, no, it hasn't really occurred to me because I've been so focused on my career and the work that I'm doing. But I have 2 older sisters, and they both have 3 kids, 3 kids each. So there's plenty of kids to go around. There's plenty of nephews and nieces to spoil and kind of rediscover the world through their eyes. I'm kind of getting that. And I feel great mentorship in the work that I do. And I feel like that's kind of scratching that itch.
Do you feel like you had mentors growing up? Is that... Because I feel like I missed out on that. I always wish that was something I had. Yeah,
I can't really put my finger on anything. There were people that I would admire, and then something would happen that I'd feel totally let down and crushed. And it seemed like every star I hitched my wagon to would kind of dissipate after a while.
The twilight of the idols.
Yeah. I mean, definitely right now, Rodrigo is working very closely with me at Rue Morgue, obviously, and he's teaching me a lot. And in turn, I try to turn around and if anyone wants to start a podcast, I'll help you out. If anyone wants to write for Rue Morgue, let's go. I'll help show you, But no, I can't really think of a strong figure I had growing up.
Yeah, I've been kind of, I guess, acting on this side of it, the older side of that thing more recently. And I've been seeing, some good results from some, the young people that have been hanging around here for the last few years. And I thought, that would have been nice to have that,
Sure.
Where you can, and I think sometimes kind of as a thought experiment to go back and, talk, everyone, thinks this, what if I talk to my younger self?
Yeah.
What would I say? And I think I recently realized that I probably wouldn't listen.
Yeah.
It would just wash off me, the good advice. So maybe the reason I didn't have it is because it would have been wasted on me.
Yeah. It was right in front of your face.
Yeah,
and
it was probably right there. And I was just, fuck you, I know what I'm doing.
Well, that was your path.
Yeah, that kind of thing. But oh geez, I'm already getting. See, maybe the pod is starting to.
But that's true creativity. Kind of has to come from within, right? You can't emulate somebody unless you're emulating their lack of technique or something. I guess you're just kind of responding to letting go and rolling with it.
Letting go, yeah, that's something I keep coming back to. The fact that I can't let go.
You can't let go?
Well, I've been doing a lot of psychedelic tripping the last few years.
Okay.
And I always find that it's a very familiar experience. When I get to the depth of the experience, I always kind of get to something which is analogous, kind of a metaphor, not necessarily a hallucination, but in some way I'm at a stage where I get to a limit and I think, well, all I have to do is cross this threshold. And there it is, whatever that's kind of this universal joy or whatever. I kind of feel like it's right there. And sometimes I convince myself that I'm going to go in, and then almost always just before I do, some other part of me jumps in and says, stop. What if it's, something else? What if there's deception involved? What if it's not true? All the skepticism just kind of jumps back in and it keeps me from taking that, what seems like a final step towards
that sounds
this
awful.
Letting go.
That sounds very frustrating. I'm so sorry.
Well, don't let me paint the wrong picture of it. It's still amazing and wonderful to get to. And maybe in some ways, I think it could be just an example of like another layer of a turtle in a sense. It's like you get to peel the onion. Maybe what I'm experiencing is that thing I'm going to experience over and over again. And in some ways, that's true. It's like you feel that and you burst through. And then you find yourself at another one later.
Maybe.
So, in some ways, it's not necessarily an ultimate step that I'm going to take. It's just another step.
It might be rungs to an endless ladder where you are getting higher and higher, but there's always another rung, right?
That seems more likely.
I think you got to pick the one you like best. I think you have some agency in how you respond to that situation. It's if you let it frustrate you or if you let it motivate you to keep going.
Do you ever go into those altered states of consciousness? Is that...
I am a big fan of mushrooms. I start craving it maybe once a year. I start feeling like I need to kind of touch into that level of myself. And the last time I had that was last summer. And it was the seeds of all the change that I've experienced in the past year were kind of culminating. And I was starting to feel a little bit of anxiety. I was feeling excitement, but also anxiety, and I just kind of needed to get in touch with what I want and a sense of purpose, and mushrooms have always done that for me. As for anything harder or more chemical, I'm afraid of the time frame commitment, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, that's kind of hard to set aside a long period of time to
and part of me just feels like I'm 35 now, like maybe if I did it in my 20s I'd kind of know what to expect, whereas now I'm less comfortable with not knowing what to expect.
That's interesting because I had the reverse experience. I feel like I was much better able to deal with it at an older age. I didn't start until my late 30s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I'm glad that was the case because it would have probably been wasted on me as a youth. It would have been maybe a novel experience rather than an educational one.
Interesting.
Oh, one sec. Is that Jonathan? Could you text him, please? Thank you.
It's like a saw or a drill or something.
Yeah.
That's too bad.
Sorry, what was it?
I did Datura once upon a time.
Oh wait, is that super strong? What?
Yeah.
Holy shit! You know what?
I know. I've never done anything chemical except for that one time.
Wow.
I was high for about 3 days straight.
So it's true. We had an episode 2 or 3 episodes ago where we had a guy that I guess he's academic interests in drug policy.
Okay.
And he actually mentioned that drug as the only one that didn't seem to have any redeeming qualities.
It wasn't fun.
Yeah.
I don't remember a whole lot of it. I was on mushrooms, and there's this place in Ottawa near Carleton University. You remember the Arboretum? in Ottawa.
Not as familiar with Carleton.
Humongous, beautiful trees. And so we just went to eat a bunch of mushrooms and climb a bunch of trees. And it's nice. And you're in nature and it's nice. And we were walking back toward downtown. And one among us was very into psychedelics. And he found this plant in the Arboretum. And he's like, oh, this will really fuck us up. So we filled his backpack and we went back to my apartment. And myself and my boyfriend at the time we ate seeds, and someone else among us broke up the roots and just kind of let the root juice get all over his hands, and his hands got really red, and he got high. And my boyfriend and I got wicked high too. And this was like in the middle of the night, so the group kind of dissipated, and I was violently ill the next morning. I was hallucinating crazily, and my vision was impaired in the weirdest way. Like, I'm nearsighted as it is, but I could not see anything from my fingertips to my face. Anything that close in my field of vision was a complete blur. I could only see further away, which meant
negative snow globe.
It was so I couldn't use my phone. I couldn't read. I was like, and
Do you remember much of what you were hallucinating? I'm just kind of fascinated by
one hallucination I recall in particular was seeing things imprinted in walls. It reminded me of, like, in the Bugs Bunny cartoons when Sylvester would get hit with a shovel and you would just see the outline of his face. Lots of imprints in walls. I don't remember it being particularly scary or alarming, but it was maybe the only visual that I recall.
So was it just the fact that it stuck around too long that makes it unpleasant, or is it?
That stuck. It stuck around way too long, and I was very sick. I mean,
physical.
I remember the vomit tasting very poisonous and it was like I drank, drain cleaner. Oh, is that your neighbor being like, "Hey, maybe. Let me make some more noise"?
Yeah.
Wouldn't do it again. 9 out of 10 would not do again.
No. Well, I mean, there is a part of me that's kind of a bit of a psychonaut that really just wants to do things as an experiment.
Sure.
Some part of me. Another part of me is doing it, therapeutically and to learn. That's a large part of it. But yeah, I got to admit, most of it's just kind of like experimental curiosity. Especially coming from a philosophical, point of view. It's like, what is it to be in another altered consciousness? And when you're in it and you're thinking about it, it's a different kind of experience than stepping outside and thinking about it. And there's much to be learned there.
But you're also grappling with your personal demons, so to speak. So do you think there's some element of just trying to find a way to live comfortably?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always kind of think about my pursuits, and maybe even this podcast is kind of a two-pronged approach to, and that's kind of how I see philosophy, is like you're basically dealing with two questions. One is like, what the fuck is going on? And the other one is, how the fuck should I live? It's like, and one impacts the other in some sense. Like, if you think about metaphysics and epistemology and science, and you try to think about what's going on. And then when you think about having an understanding of that, that's going to inform how you decide to live, and maybe how you advocate for others to live, and maybe your politics could arise from that. But that first set of questions are never fully answered. So you have to kind of move on and jump into the circle of interpretation without having complete answers,
right?
Without having kind of fundamental justifications for your beliefs. And but we still have to live, and we still have to swim in this whole thing.
That's right.
Kind of like that existentialist approach. The responsibility's on us now to create this, because it's not going to be furnished from above.
That's something that's been on my mind, just because my life has changed so much in the past couple of months, and so I feel like I'm caught between adjusting my reality to accommodate my new situation and the inverse. Like, exactly what do I have agency over? And, I've always worked very hard. I've always done my horror journalism pursuits on the side. So now that it's at the forefront and I still have that stuff running along the side, it feels different. It's all starting to feel more like work. And so I find I'm having to seriously question what it is I want to do, what it is I'm going after, why. Like, all the work that I've done, was it to get me here? So can I maybe chill out on the extras, or what matters most to me?
I find a lot of us don't ask those questions.
Oh boy.
Me included. I'm gonna turn 50 in a month, And I don't have an answer to that. I don't know what in a sense that I don't really have a goal.
Okay.
And I feel like that might be helpful if I said, well, this is a project that I'm definitely want to achieve and do this. I've never really done that. But I've kind of had this general vague pathways in mind. I figure, if I go down this path, it might lead to the kind of things I like to, that I might like to arrive at.
Sure.
But I never really have a goal.
Right.
I don't know if you do it that way.
No, yeah, that's. I never thought I would be editor of Rue Morgue Magazine.
Right.
I never did. I didn't know where stuff would take me. I was just confident it would take me somewhere. It's somebody out there wants to hear what I have to say, and if it's going to happen through the YouTube channel, if I get my own TV show, if it's going to happen through the podcast, getting speaking engagements, maybe I'll write another book, maybe I'll this, maybe I'll that, and it just so happened to take me here, and I'm okay with it.
Yeah, it's a pretty good gig, right?
It's a good place to be, yeah. And you're right. Just that I get to contemplate that is a position of privilege, and that's another thing I'm working on is gratitude. And it sounds so cheesy,
Yeah,
like do you get into the self-help?
I haven't,
hole?
but I appreciate it more now. I understand that there's some use to it. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So like I'm starting to a problem that I encounter when I look at motivation techniques and videos and books and strategies, as they tend to be very religious, and they tend to really stress prayer and gratitude to God. And I'm not going to respond to that. But if you meditate and you're just kind of like, what is the difference between this and prayer exactly? Right. So again, I feel like I'm cherry picking with different motivational, inspirational, self-help strategies just to try to get by.
Yeah, it seems like prayer and, the Eastern meditations and even like the Muslims on their prayer rugs, it's kind of like a scheduled time for reflection. Whether or not, it doesn't seem to matter what the content of those prayers are or those thoughts necessarily. I mean, just the fact that you stop your body and you stop your thoughts and you kind of focus them in on a certain way and regularize the motions of it. And your breathing even is getting regularized in a situation like that. So it will have those positive effects.
That's right.
One way or another.
Yeah.
So
we're creatures of habit.
Yeah.
And if you want anything to repeat itself, you just have to do it regularly, and your body will remember and it'll respond.
That. Yeah. There's a lot of tricks that I'm kind of cluing into. In a way, you're hacking your own body.
Totally.
Your own self,
yeah.
Right?
That's there's a movement for that online. Like they call it, transhumanism and body hacking. Yeah. And there's a technological element of, getting implants in your hands and whatever the fuck. But
that's taking it to actual physical hacking. And
yes.
Yeah. But I mean, in terms of like any kind of therapy is really hacking of your own mind in a way. And so like last spring, I found myself in quite a funk and depressed in some way. But what I kind of hacked myself into getting out of it was, and I probably heard somebody mention this. I mean, it's not that it's an original idea or anything, but I said, okay, today I'm going to make my bed before I leave my bedroom. It's not something I wasn't doing. I was just kind of leaving it like that. And so that became kind of a habit every morning, regardless. And then, you kind of add another step to that. And I thought, okay, well, every time I'm walking down these stairs, I'm going to do a few, chin up kind of a things just to get my body, a couple of things like that. And that made the next step easier. And then I got on my bicycle and then I said, I'll just, bike a block or two. And then I ended up actually biking every day for hours and hours.
Wow.
From May until November.
Okay.
And I ended up, not that I was trying, but I ended up losing some weight, feeling better, feeling clearer. And but if I said to myself, I need to do this where I'm biking every day and feeling like this, it would seem too much. Like, totally. I can't do that.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I can't even get up and make my bed.
Yeah.
But, it's that old saying about the journey of 1,000 miles or whatever.
Starts begins with a step.
Yeah. And so you kind of trick yourself sometimes to do that.
Well, there's something called The Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod. Have you seen it?
No.
Well, he didn't invent this method, but he's got a book about getting up super early in the morning and just developing a routine little by little, just like you said. And if you get up super early, and he had an acronym, which I think was SAILS. I think it was self-affirmation, and then there's meditation in there, exercise, scribing, reading. Anyway, all these things that you
series
just...
of steps that he did every day,
you break off,
incrementally.
You break off into 10, 15-minute chunks. And then if you do that for long enough, you look back on your life, and I exercised every day. I read every day. I wrote every day, and I meditated every day.
That would be so powerful.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I've been getting up early.
Yeah, so you got the first step of the first step.
I've got the first step. I am inclined to lie in bed and fuck around on social media until I have to start work. But little by little, I'm working on it. I see the value.
Yeah. And, just even mentioning it now kind of forces you in a way to follow through a little bit more, right? So you're kind of...
Practice what I preach.
Yeah. And that's, I don't often practice. I give great advice, but I rarely practice it. I guess we all do that in some way.
I think so.
So I've been trying to go see this movie the last couple of weeks, and it keeps getting sidetracked, but Get Out.
Oh.
It's kind of a horror film, but it's a comedy horror?
It's a comedy horror film.
Yeah. Have you seen it?
Yes.
It's getting a lot of great responses. What do you think?
It's worth it. It's marvelous. It's marvelous. It's exactly...
What a surprise. It's interesting to see.
It's actually got all three of those typologies that I was telling you about before. There's some jump scares, there's some genuinely creepy moments, but fundamentally this movie delves into racism so completely. Wow. It's got the microaggressions, it's got the macroaggressions, it's got the institutional racism, it's got the social racism, it's got all of that. And it even kind of begs questions about a person's own relationship with their skin and how it is you internalize the cards you've been dealt once again. Yeah, I loved it.
Amazing. Yeah, I've been a fan of his comedy for a while, but I didn't even hear about this movie being made, and all of a sudden, boom, it's a hit. It was great to see. It's good to see surprises like that. You're not getting as many surprises, I find, in the film business.
I agree with that. That was a complete surprise coming from comedy. But then again, some comedians, when they tap into horror, comedy isn't all that far from horror. I think Rodrigo was even saying that in when he was chatting with you about it. It's
because of the involuntary body reaction.
Well, that's right. They're tapping into something kind of innate and fundamental, and there's formulas you can follow, and tweaking with those formulas produces the best result.
What do you think about the formulaic nature of film? Because, it's so, in a way, it's kind of the ancient 3-act play that just keeps being, repeated over and over again.
I remember when I was younger, like kids watch TV and they're like, how come nobody ever goes to the bathroom? And you have to be like, oh, because that wouldn't make for good TV.
Right. Unless it advances the story.
Well, it doesn't
There's an
matter.
economy of ideas in a film. Right? So when you see
Sure.
something, you can almost be guaranteed, well, that's going to be relevant later on.
Oh, yeah.
If it's not, then it probably shouldn't be in there.
That's right.
Yeah.
And then I remember I used to watch Inspector Gadget as a kid, and I thought Dr. Claw was so fucking cool, and you could never see him because he was always in his chair and just stroking his cat, and like, when is he going to win? And I genuinely thought that one day I was going to fire up this Saturday morning cartoon and the bad guy was going to win. And it's like, it doesn't work that way. Yeah. And so then when I was a teenager, I was like, well, someone should do that. Someone should break that rule, And then you get a little bit older and you realize that those who do break that rule, there's a reason. There's a reason why.
Right.
And especially in horror, I think there's a lot of remakes, and a lot of the remakes are in response to people who saw the original film and just kind of thought to themselves, what about this? I feel like I could make this story better if I just do this. And, the audience says something like, Michael Myers is so cool. I wish I knew more about his childhood. And then they make a movie about Michael Myers' childhood, and
fan fiction kind of a
demystifies him and ruins him. So I think in a way, audiences think that they know what they want, but they need to kind of be led along that path.
That's a good point, yeah. And that's kind of a wisdom about almost everything that we profess to like or want. And then when you do some kind of tests on people, their involuntary reactions indicate that they're actually not preferring what they're saying that they're preferring. And to such an extent that we're lying to ourselves, much of the time. I'll take that back. It's almost, it's not that you're lying to yourself, but it's the way I think of it is that there's more than one you. There's parts of you that are kind of at interplay within you. And some of those parts might be taking this approach and another part is taking that approach. But it's not that one is lying or the other. It's just who wins out sometimes is what happens. And in a certain frame of mind or a mood, one other, cycle within you might win out. And that becomes a behavior that is pinned on you.
That's right.
Right. And it is. But it's part of your ecosystem.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, going in one direction kind of necessarily means turning a blind eye to the other direction, right?
Right.
Voluntary or involuntary.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even within marketing, I with the master's in sociology, it kind of led me to market research after I moved to Toronto. That's kind of the industry for applied sociology, so to speak. And people respond to being told what to do. I think we all like to think of ourselves as free-thinking agents, and we want as much choice as we can, and we want as much control as we can. But really, we just want to find someone that we trust enough to tell us what to do.
There's a comfort in being swaddled up and limiting your choices.
Yeah.
And in fact, you might say that we have too many choices, and that's what's really stressing us to fuck out sometimes. It's that, you can't decide. Like, I can't decide what do I want as a goal in my life because in some ways I have so many options, and that's part of the problem. Like if I was kind of, growing up poor like I was, and I'd make different decisions.
Sure.
Like I don't have to work now, so that kind of opens up too many possibilities.
Yeah. I think about that sometimes too, when people are all against arranged marriage. I'm like, that actually
seems to be
great.
Pretty successful.
That would save me a lot of fucking headaches.
Yeah. Well, my parents were pretty much an arranged marriage.
Were they? Are they still together?
Yeah.
That's
they still
nice.
hold hands at the mall.
That's nice.
They're late 70s.
Cute.
Yeah. But, my poor mom had to put up with it.
Oh, for sure. I'm sure it's not sunshine and roses, but just the idea of this is what's happening. Deal with it. It's a lot easier to deal with it than to decide whether or not to get out, if this is okay, what to do. Well,
they also say, things like you come to a big city like Toronto or New York or Los Angeles, you always have people complaining about how lonely they are. In many ways, there's a lot of single people that are looking for somebody, and it's kind of tragic in the sense that they have so many options that people are not willing to actually stop anywhere.
That's
so
right.
They just keep going from station to station, complaining about not connecting with anybody.
Yeah,
because it's kind of waiting. Yeah. We're all kind of susceptible to that sometimes until you land on the right station.
Yeah, exactly. And to a certain extent, you kind of have to create your own, I moved to Toronto because there was a horror scene here, but sometimes I think about Ottawa, and if I'd stuck around, maybe I could have started something.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Bit more like a, what is it, the small fish in a big pond kind of a thing? Is that when you move to Toronto or New York, you are in a bigger pond, and there are bigger fish around too. So I guess it's true. If you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. Kind of a
exactly.
Kind of
because
right?
I started this horror lecture series called The Black Museum, and it was modeled after something that was going on in Montreal called the Miskatonic Institute for Horror Studies, where they were doing these like master classes in horror.
Miskatonic.
The Miskatonic Institute. Yes.
Tell me, break that word down.
It's a Lovecraft reference.
Okay, yeah. See, I'm very poorly read.
Oh,
these things.
As am I. I can't go any deeper than that, but that's where that came from. And so,
okay, go on.
So we were doing something kind of modeled after them, but a little bit different. Instead of kind of an intensive weekend seminar, we would just kind of take an evening at a cinema, and we would get an expert to come and talk to the room about a given topic. And they would have a slideshow, multimedia, there'd be clips and stuff. And then the Black Museum went on to do horror debates. We had a debate where we argued what the best sequel was, what the best Stephen King adaptation was, and stuff. And it was great fun. It was well received. I really believed in it, and I cared about it. And we had a passionate fan base growing. But Toronto is so punishing for choice. You're spoiled for choice. Anything going on a given night. There's a screening at TIFF you want to see. There's a concert you want to see. There's the Black Museum. There's everything else. So part of me wonders if the Black Museum would have performed better in Ottawa when there's kind of less to do.
Interesting thought. Do you ever think about living in another city? Is that
yeah, I do. I think I love where I'm living right now, but for a while I did not like where I was living. I was paying way too much. My bills were outrageous. I was cold all the time. It was noisy, and it's miserable to not like your apartment. And the housing market in Toronto is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So, you start to kind of lose faith in improving your situation. And I have a lot of friends who've kind of gone off to Hamilton to buy houses and have property out there. And, they've got a yard.
Yeah.
And they drive out to Toronto and they want to party, and it's not that far. And so, that kind of starts to look appealing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. And it's kind of like, Brooklyn to Manhattan kind of a thing.
Sure.
And it ends up being cooler sometimes.
Yeah.
At the outer edges. And in some ways, I guess Hamilton's threatening to do that.
Yeah. Exactly.
Cooler than us, and that's great.
Yeah. I think ultimately I'd like to get into a place where I can work from anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, it seems that in publishing, you're more likely to be able to do that now than before.
Yeah, the way the office is going.
So what about that business? I mean, you've got a print magazine.
I've got a print magazine.
That's actually printing physical paper.
Yeah.
Sending it out in the mail to subscribers.
One of the last ones standing.
Yeah, that's pretty amazing.
Many an envelope. It is kind of amazing. And it's kind of inspiring that we've held on this far, and I'm excited. I'm going to make a lot of changes to the magazine, and it's scary.
Yeah.
You don't want to be the one who puts the last nail in the print industry's coffin, so to speak.
Are you contemplating such moves in a way away from physical paper? Or?
No. I think there's value in physical paper. I think I'm looking at a target market that's younger than me, which is kind of weird and making me confront my own. I always think of myself as an upstart and a young, bright-eyed up-and-comer. And now
guess what? I still do. It doesn't go away.
But then I'm like, oh no, but I'm not my target market. I want to get at these millennials, who have a sense of nostalgia, and like vinyl is back, and vinyl's back because it sounds good, and vinyl is back because it feels good, and it has a sense of nostalgia that these people haven't even experienced. So I think magazines, especially horror magazines that kind of had their heyday in the 80s, there's still a little bit to go before we make that full circle to achieve that same kind of nostalgia. But I think we're positioned to get there. I think Rue Morgue, it's an editorial of such level that you can't find online, and even the design of it. I brought you a copy of my first issue.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
There.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first one in which you were at the helm.
That's right.
Just came out.
Yeah.
Sorry, I missed that launch party. How was that?
It was great. It was great. It was, like Rodrigo's out and he's meeting everybody. And I think there was a lot of people who, oh my God, this is Mr. Rue Morgue. And I think they're all
I guess he's not around as much. So is he taking on a bit of a mythic character?
Absolutely. I remember even my first time meeting him, I was like, he seems 10 feet tall in the photos. And then you see him and you're just a guy, And
a nice one at that.
A super nice one. I think people are maybe not surprised, but people don't expect him to. He doesn't like to talk about himself. He wants to know what you're thinking and what you're feeling and what's up with you. And and I think that's really rewarding to people to meet him. I wish he was around more.
Yeah, he's always recognizable too, especially when he's got that hat on. And I met him a few years back. I met him at Istanbul airport. I was waiting for him and Natalie to come by, and he got off the plane, and we sat down and we were having a coffee at the airport. And a bunch of these Turkish people came up to me and said they thought he was some other celebrity.
No way.
Yeah, they said,
Do you know who?
It was a guy named John Bonomo, who had apparently just won the kind of like America's Got Talent, the Turkish version of it. So he became like a huge pop star all of a sudden. And he apparently wore a similar hat. Yeah. So everyone's saying, is that John Bonomo? I go, well, no, he's another famous guy.
Amazing.
But yeah, sometimes, I mean, everybody you meet, you eventually realize that they're just people.
Yeah.
It's kind of refreshing, right?
Yeah. I mean, people have to kind of let that let their guard down, and sometimes it's harder to see the humanity in some people than others, right? Have to break through on some level. I'm so inculcated in my little horror bubble that sometimes when I get out, and I make a strict conscious effort to get myself out and into other circles, I think it's important. I hate it. And I get there and I'm just kind of like, you like horror movies? No? Shit.
Really?
Now what?
So it's an all-consuming kind of a narrowly focused.
Like, yeah. It's always kind of at the baseline of the level that I can talk to people, and when that's taken away from me, I kind of don't know where to go.
So I guess earlier I kind of asked a question in a general sense, like what attracts people to this kind of a thing. But I guess in your personal sense, what do you, when you're introspecting, what is it about this horror culture that keeps you here so engaged?
What is it that keeps me here? Well, it challenges me continually. There's never one way to think or feel about a given piece of text, and I think even at this stage to look back on how I felt about earlier movies and how that has changed. Like even when you watch The Exorcist as a kid, you're just kind of like, this is a scary, gory movie, and holy shit, she's possessed. And then I got older and I watched it again, and I related a lot more with the mom. And her frustration with the medical community and how desperate she felt, as an atheist woman, to have to reach to religion to save her daughter, and the turmoil and the anguish therein. I think it just continually challenges me again and again in so many different ways.
It just kind of reminded me, like, I was around when The Exorcist was released.
Okay.
And I remember there was such a buzz about it.
People fainting in theaters. And
I mean, in retrospect, a lot of it was probably manufactured PR to make it seem like it was a bigger deal. Maybe it wasn't a bigger deal. It's just like, I guess we didn't have as much choice. Because, you look back at some of these horror movies that everybody made a fuss about, and they're not as scary as maybe they could be in the way that you thought they were. And many of them don't even really hold up very well. In retrospect, they didn't really age well. But they were such a big deal when they came out. That's not really happening anymore, is there? I mean, that's, I guess, in almost any cultural product, no one's really making a huge fuss about anymore. It seems like we're all kind of in our niche little genre worlds in a way.
Yeah, very much so. There was a movie that came out just last year that was called Raw. It's a French horror film, and somebody reportedly fainted at TIFF. And so I'm seeing that stigma, maybe I shouldn't say stigma, that notoriety has followed everybody wants to see the movie that made someone faint, and whether or not it was a stunt, whether or not that person was medicated or had a pre-existing medical condition, who knows? And
either way, it could be used that way in a public relations.
Well, yeah, and I haven't seen it yet. I've heard great things about it, but that fainting story being attached to it is going to make me roll my eyes.
So, what's been released lately that has stood out?
Well, you mentioned Get Out.
Yeah.
Which was, it blew my mind. Another one that I'm going to be tackling in an upcoming issue of the magazine is a movie called The Evil Within. And this movie was brought to my attention from one of Rue Morgue's writers, who was like, hey, this movie just sneaked out very quietly, straight to video on demand, but it was made by this billionaire, eccentric meth addict who died before it was completed.
Whoa.
And so that was kind of an interesting backdrop. And so I said, okay, well, chase the story. That sounds pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I'll see if it's any good. And we got a screener, and I loved it.
What was the name of it again?
The Evil Within.
The Evil Within.
The Evil Within, yeah.
Straight to the point.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of funny because there was a big video game release of the same name last year. So anything you look up kind of jumps right to that.
But not related?
Not related, no, not in the slightest. Yeah. So we watched the film, and it scared the shit out of me. Like I put it on when it was light out, and then darkness fell, and I didn't want to go downstairs.
Wow!
It's such a great feeling.
These
right?
things still scare you.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I can have my chain rattled, and for sure, if I let it. And part of that is a voluntary suspension of disbelief.
Right.
And part of you have to kind of let your empathy flow. But yeah, I think that one is not a lot of people are talking about it just yet, just because it snuck out straight to VOD. So I'm kind of hoping that coverage of the issue, like Rue Morgue, can be the one to bust that wide open.
Yeah. So there's still a heavy focus on cinema in Rue Morgue. I mean, but horror culture is not. It's not just about films.
Oh, that's right.
Right. So there's a lot more to
very
it.
Very right.
And
part of my mandate in my tenure as editor is going to be to really expand that, because horror is, I don't know, I don't want to say popular, but there's definitely a gothic, Wicca, witchy renaissance happening right now. That's like people respond to darkness in a variety of ways, be it through fashion, through literature, through music. And yeah, I feel like Rue Morgue is the only horror outlet that really takes that holistic cultural approach. It's part of what attracted me to the brand.
Is there a kind of a consistency in your quotation mark market or demographics, the people that are drawn to this Rue Morgue community? Are you noticing? I mean, I guess you got to think about it in terms of someone who's marketing to people. So you try to understand it that way, but also just from a perspective of experiencing and being around certain types of people. Are they generally like macabre? Are they optimistic? Are they the same as everybody else?
I'd say they're pretty happy-go-lucky. They're pretty I don't think, like I said, I don't think everybody thinks as deeply and philosophically about horror as I do. But in my podcast and in my YouTube channel, and now with the magazine, I'm kind of going to say what I have to say and what I'd like to hear, because I feel like I had hitherto not had that itch scratched by anything out there. And rather than try to outperform other outlets at doing the same thing and hitting the same target market, I kind of want to catch the ones that are falling through the cracks.
You said your podcast partner has written some books on these type of topics, or
she we brought her in to do a lecture at the Black Museum. She did a lecture on found footage films, and then she did another lecture on films of the New French Extremity. And so her first book was on the New French Extremity. That came out last year, and I wrote the foreword for that. And now
I was going to ask you if you've written a book of your own about this.
My master's thesis was published as a book and as a textbook, so it's morbidly expensive, and it's like it's got all the
to ensure nobody buys it.
Exactly. Not to mention the theory establishing chapters that sociology made necessary. And for a while, I was flirting with the idea of like rewriting it and making it a bit more accessible.
More popular,
but then the zombies, the ship kind of sailed.
They're always around.
They're always around.
It's kind of a...
need to think of something new to say about them, I guess.
You've dissected the zombies enough? Is that maybe?
I kind of identified the first wave and then a second wave, and I feel like something kind of needs to happen in the lore to shake me out. But the magazine's definitely keeping me busy. Maybe there'll be more books. And
you guys also put on a lot of these... conference or convention type things too, right? So and that seems to be a huge part of the community's engagement with each other.
That's right. Yeah. Horror celebrities are there's the convention circuit, and they tend to really embrace their fans, and I think that's why horror has such a strong sense of community.
Is there a crossover with the Star Wars nerds in some way?
Well, Star Wars nerds and Star Trek nerds don't mix, and I feel like horror fans are more of a... No, I don't know.
What side are you on, Star Wars or Star Trek?
I'm Trek.
Yeah, me too.
Are you?
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Next generation?
Well, I grew up with the original, believe it or not. Because it was just on reruns all the time after school, and I remember watching Captain Kirk over and over again. And probably identifying more with Spock than this kind of hyper rationalist kind of a role.
Yes. The removed philosopher. That's
right.
Curious, Captain.
And it's funny because I kind of started to eventually see that as in a way as tropes or as certain archetypes in a way, but also within a framework of like Nietzschean philosophy. So I used to think maybe that Spock was Apollo, like Apollonian and the Dionysian, and Kirk was the Dionysian. But I was wrong about that. I'm gonna explain it in more detail so you don't have that confusion. But Nietzsche was talking about these two life forces, the creative forces in nature, but in also human nature. And one was about this drive towards regularizing, like order and structure and rationality, and that was like the Apollonian. And you can see how Spock kind of represents that approach to the world. But I now see that McCoy was really about the body, because I mean he's literally a doctor. So everything that he's always harping on about is but the human does this, and he's kind of proud of all our inconsistencies and bizarre type behaviors, and is always kind of ribbing Spock about being so removed from those human aspects that are kind of messy. Right. And then I guess I see Kirk as kind of the perfect embodiment of the two, because he's kind of like a super rational genius, but he's also, he's fucking aliens on,
he takes
beating
risks,
up and kicking ass. So
Spock and McCoy are always on his case about, you can't do that, Jim.
So he's kind of like the perfect mix of the two. So in a way, he's kind of like an overman,
Sure.
Like, he's the original Superman in sci-fi.
It's interesting because I'm watching Deep Space Nine now, so I'm kind of getting caught up. After Next Generation ended, I was like, Gene Roddenberry's dead, and I'm done. But now, and there's always kind of a Spock character, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's always kind of there's the Data, and now I'm seeing it in Odo, and then I
the
feel
Borg
like
character and the other Voyager, was it?
There is a Borg in Voyager.
Yeah, so she's kind of taken on that automatic, regulated way
there.
of being. Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah.
They're all on Netflix. Thank God for that.
Yeah. And, speaking of which, I just came across, I had totally forgotten about one of these series in the Star Trek universe, which was Star Trek Enterprise. Do you remember that? That just came and went.
I saw it on Netflix recently, and I had that same kind of feeling of, I've heard terrible things about it.
Yeah.
I've heard that, like, all of the idealism.
It's very hokey in some.
Yeah.
And it seems dated, too, very much.
Wow.
Even though it's only 15, 16 years ago when it stopped. But you know what it was? It came out during 9/11 era.
Is that the problem?
Yeah, I think that might. Like, I would think that almost any kind of a series like that would have a hard uptake. Because there's a lot of optimism of the future. And at that moment, I don't think anybody was really, I don't want to hear about this. Go, rah, rah, look at this beauty of technology and humans coming together to do this in the future. Bullshit.
Right.
Everybody's thinking and feeling.
That's right.
So
there's a horror movie that came out right around 9/11 that is excellent, that got really...
Donnie Darko, I think, came out.
I think so too.
And that was that's why it took many years, it seemed, for it to, because same for me, it's like I didn't really notice it. And I thought, this is a great film. Why didn't I notice this? Yeah.
Bad timing. Bad timing.
It's kind of a curse to release something like that.
Yeah, no kidding.
But you never know.
There's never really a good time. What were you doing? Do you remember what you were doing when it happened?
Yeah, I was in Istanbul.
Okay.
I was actually trying on clothes in a mall in Istanbul, and it kind of got quiet around me.
It did?
I didn't. And
you
know
felt
what?
it?
I don't know if the sales staff knew what was going on and they weren't telling me. Like, I was just being nonchalant. Oh, they're going to try these pants on. Being kind of a goofus consumer. And I was doing that for like an hour or so. And when all this was happening in the mall, so when I left the store, I go by the TV store and everyone's just looking at what the fuck's going on. And then I saw the second plane go in, and then the other plane, the building come down, and wow, that just was kind of earth shattering.
Yeah.
And over there as well. So you had kind of an interesting reaction from people.
It's interesting that it was just as much of a thunderclap over there, because you hear people say that this happens to America and it's the end of the world, and this kind of thing happens all the time, all over.
There was
world.
that initial reaction, and I gotta say, even within the first few minutes of it, I actually did hear people say something like that. Oh, well, now they know what it's like. That kind of a response, but that went away quickly. It's like, shit, It's kind of the initial reaction was, this shit happens all the time everywhere. Why is everyone freaking out? But then, you kind of understand it.
Because America. I was in class.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
So this was a university class?
I had an early morning class, and I came out, and I just had all these messages on my phone, and I had a friend who was panicking, saying that I should get out of downtown. I was at U of O, which is, as you know, right near Parliament.
Right.
Get out of downtown.
Target.
Please.
Oh, Canada.
Oh, Canada.
Well, thank you for coming in.
It was my
pleasure.
pleasure.
That was a fun conversation.
I enjoyed it. Thank
Let's
you.
keep talking. Do a high five.
Sure.
Wait, hold on.
Got to look at
One
the
more.
elbow. There it goes.
I can't see worse shit anymore.
You've you've got your glasses on. I don't. We can blame
going
me.
Blind. Thanks, Andrea.
You're welcome. Thank you. Religious background? I love it. Do you have a religious background? I love it. Do you have a religious background? I love
Jump into the circle of interpretation without having complete off. Poetry, the response off. Poetry.
I mean, people have to. I mean, people have to. I love it. Do you have a religious background? I love.
Jump into the circle of interpretation without having complete answers.
Right.
Without having.
Yeah, exactly. Make your own pick. Yeah, exactly. Sure. Pick. Yeah, exactly. Make your own pick. Yeah, exactly. Sure.
Use them all.
Pick. Yeah, exactly. Make your own pick. Yeah, exactly. Sure.
Use them all.
Pick. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Make your own pick. Yeah, exactly. Sure.
Use them all.
Use them all. Just pick. Yeah, exactly. Make your own. Use them all. Just cherry pick. Yeah, exactly. Use them all. Just cherry pick.
I've got a twofold project as I, which is kind of bizarre. I've got a twofold project as I said. One is to figure out what the fuck is going on, and the other one is how the fuck should I? I've got a twofold project as I said. One is to figure out what the fuck is going on, and the other one is how the fuck should I? I've got a twofold project as I said. One is to figure out what the fuck is going on, and the other one is how the fuck should I? I've got a twofold project as I said. One is to figure out what the fuck is going on, and the other one is how the fuck should I? I've got a twofold project as I said. One is to figure out what the fuck is going on, and the other one is how the fuck should I? I've got a twofold project as I said. One is to figure out what the fuck is going on, and the other one is how the fuck should I? I've got a twofold project as I said. One is to figure out what the fuck is going on, and the other one is how the fuck should I? I've got a twofold project as I said. One is to figure out what the fuck is going on, and the other one is how the fuck should I? I've got a twofold project as I said. One is to figure out what the fuck is going on, and the other one is how the fuck should I? I've got a twofold project as I said. One is to figure out what the fuck is going on, and the other one is how the fuck should I?
This is what's happening. A lot easier to deal with it than to decide whether or not to get help. This is what's happening. This is what's happening. This is what's happening. A lot easier to deal with it than to decide whether or not this is what's happening. A lot easier to deal with it than to decide whether or not this is what's happening. A lot easier to deal with it than to decide whether or not to get help. This is what's happening.
What's going on here? thrown into, we keep waking up and finding reframings, reinterpretations. And then we realize that it's all interpretation all the way down. It's turtles all the way down. The mystery that we're thrown into, we keep waking up and finding reframings, reinterpretations. And then we realize that it's all interpretation all the way down. It's turtles all the way down. The mystery that we're thrown into, we keep waking up and finding reframings, reinterpretations. And then we realize that it's all interpretation all the way down. It's turtles all the way down. The mystery that we're thrown into, we keep waking up and finding reframings, reinterpretations. And then we realize that it's all interpretation all the way down. It's turtles all the way down. The mystery that we're thrown into, we keep waking up and finding. We're thrown into. The mystery that we're. Fuck! What's going on here?
This is what's happening. Deal with it. It's a lot easier to deal with it than to decide whether or not this is what's happening. Deal with it. It's a lot easier to deal with it than to decide whether or not this is what's happening. Deal with it. It's a lot easier to deal with it than to decide whether or not to get out. This is okay. What to do?
Well, he also said, yeah.
This is what's happening. Deal with it. It's a lot easier to deal with it than to decide whether or not to get out. This is okay. What to do?
Well, he also said, yeah.
This is what's happening. Deal with it. 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 A lot easier to deal with it than to decide whether or not this is what's happening. Deal with it. A lot easier to deal with it than to decide whether or not to get out. This is okay. What to do?
Well, he also said, yeah.
This is what's happening. Deal with it. A lot easier to deal with it than to decide whether or not to get out. This is okay. What to do?
Well, he also said, yeah.
This is what's happening. Deal with it. A lot easier to deal with it than to decide whether or not to get out. This is okay. What to do?
Well, he also said, yeah.
This is what's happening. Deal with it. A lot easier to deal with it than to decide whether or not to get out. This is okay. What to do?
Well, he also said, yeah.
This is what's happening. Deal with it. A lot easier to deal with it than to decide whether or not to get out. This is okay. What to do?
Well, he also said, yeah.
This is what's happening. Deal with it. A lot easier to deal with it than to decide whether or not to get out. This is okay. What to do?
Well, he also said, yeah.
This is what's happening. Deal with it. It's a lot easier to deal with it than to decide whether or not this is what's happening. Deal with it. It's a lot. This is what's happening. Deal with it. It's a lot. This is what's happening. Deal with it. It's a lot. This is what's happening. Deal with it. It's a lot. This is what's happening. Deal with it. It's a lot. This is what's happening. Deal with it. It's a lot. This is what's happening. Deal with it. It's a lot. This is what's happening. Deal with it. It's a lot. This is what's happening. Deal with it. It's a lot. This is what's happening. Deal with it. It's a lot. This is what's happening. Deal with it. It's a lot. This is what's happening. Deal with it. It's a lot. This is what's happening. Deal with it. It's a lot. This is what's happening.
Thrown into. The mystery that we're thrown into. What's going on here?
This is what's happening. Feel with it. It's a lot easier. This is what's happening. This is what's happening. This is what's happening. Feel with it. This is what's happening.
What's going on here? What is this? Why am I here? Why am I? What is I? What is why?
This is what's happening. Feel with it. It's a lot easier to deal with it than to decide whether or not to tell if this is okay, what to do. This is what's happening. Feel with it. This is what's happening. Feel with it. It's a lot easier to deal with it than to decide whether or not. This is what's happening. Feel with it. It's a lot.
What's going on here?
This is what's happening. Feel with it. It's a lot.
What's going on here? The mystery that we're thrown into.
This is what's happening. Feel with it. This is what's happening. Feel with it. This is what's happening. Feel with it. It's a lot easier to deal with it than to decide whether or not. This is what's happening. Feel with it. This is what's happening. Feel with it. This is what's happening. Feel with it.
The mystery that we're thrown into. We keep waking up and finding reframings, reinterpretations, and then we realize that it's all interpretation all the way down. It's turtles all the way down.
Situation, being the one thinking person, and being the one thinking person, being the one thinking person, being the one thinking person, and the one thinking person, and thinking people. Situation, unthinking people. Situation in the West, everywhere. In the West, maybe the one. This is what's happening. Feel with it. It's a lot easier to being the one person, and this is what's happening. Of unthinking. This is what's happening. Feel with it.